always isn't, doesn't cooperate, especially at the right
Never has
time. But if
worked.
Andrea's got it, we'll be
Well,
fine.
Yes, I just need to get my laptop off being locked up. So I think it looks like I'm going to have to log out and log back in.
Okay.
So, you know what we might be able to do is I'm happy to advance in the agenda and introduce our keynote speaker, and we could go ahead with that part of the presentation and just adjust the agenda slightly. How does that sound?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, good evening, everyone. Thanks, Misha, for all your work that you've done organizing this. I know you've really done the lion's share. And I just want to thank you all so much for being here tonight to support this new League initiative. It's hard to believe for me, but I've been a member of the League of Women Voters of the Greater Verde Valley, now of Northern Arizona, for almost 10 years. I am really proud to be a part of this organization that I know serves an important purpose in our community. And I agreed to co-chair this committee because I think that the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion is extremely important for the League and for society. I also think this issue is unique in that it affects the organization of the League itself. Further, I have been personally confronted with how much learning and work that I have to do around this issue. Tonight, I will share 2 resources that I think may be of interest, and we will continue to share resources throughout this series. First, just drop this in the chat here. The first is a video-based course called The History of the Black Experience, produced by Dr. Leonard Moore and his team at the University of Texas at Austin. I took this course, I loved it. I think you'll really enjoy it. I can't recommend it highly enough. And the second resource that I want to share is a book that was given to me by my friend Joey Morelli, who will be helping us with a program on Black Trans Lives Matter in June of this year. The book is My Grandmother's Hands, and it explains how the trauma of racism is embodied and how that affects the lived and the felt experiences of African American, European American, and law enforcement bodies. I want to thank Joey for his willingness to help the League and serve as a community resource for DEI programming. DEI is also, and obviously, a political issue, and as such, an important topic for the League. State lawmakers across the US have already filed more than 100 bills since the November election aimed at reforming election procedure and limiting voter access. I'll share just one more thing. I love Zoom for this. I love how easy it is to share resources. It's great. But since the inception of our republic, who can participate in the political process has been limited, and it has been limited formally and informally on the basis of race and class and gender. But it is the position of the League of Women Voters to, and I quote, promote an open governmental system that is representative and accountable and responsive, end quote. We hope that the work of this committee will strengthen this League position. And now, to help us understand what is at stake with the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to formally launch this new DEI initiative, we are so honored to have the Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lucille Lewis. Dr. Lewis is the Director for Undergraduate Programs at the W.A. Franke College of Business at Northern Arizona University. She has studied psychology and holds a doctorate in divinity as well as an MBA. She has extensive professional experience in academia and entrepreneurship and has worked in higher ed for 20 years, in addition to pursuing interests in the visual and wearable arts as a costume and fine jewelry retailer. Dr. Lewis is passionate about her work with equity, diversity, and inclusion with her students and with the larger Northern Arizona community. Finally, and personally, I've had the pleasure of knowing and working with Dr. Lewis for the past several years. I am honored to count her as a dear friend and so grateful that she could be here to launch the League of Women Voters Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion program. Dr. Lewis, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sister Andrea. Sister Dr. Andrea, thank you. If I can have share screen permission, please?
You should have it as a co-host.
I'm not able to, I've been disabled.
Okay, let me make you a co-host. There we go, more. Okay, make co-host.
And I think that
There we go. Now you should be okay. Do you have it?
Yes,
Oh, great.
thank you. If we could begin here, again, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And I'm not sure, can you verify, because something's going on with my screen? Can someone tell me what they're seeing?
We see your slide, your first slide,
There we
diversity,
go.
equity, inclusion around the world.
There it is.
It's good
Thank
now.
you. Greetings, everyone, particularly to the League of Women Voters of Northern Arizona and to all of the other special people that are here. Again, good evening. It is indeed an honor to be here this evening as you launch your Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. I am profoundly grateful to my sister, friend, and colleague, Dr. Andrea Hershard, and to my new sister, Misha K-Spar. And I really admire and am humbled by their commitments to this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I've been charged this evening on speaking to 3 hot topics, and those would be slavery, the true history of police, and why Black Lives Matter. But first, I'd like to begin with sharing some breaking news. 2 nominees for the Nobel Peace Prize this year. Stacey Abrams was nominated because of her work, because that work helped boost voter turnout via nonviolence activism. And her work has been acknowledged because it follows in Dr. King's footsteps in the fight for equality before the law and for civil rights. And then Black Lives Matter was nominated for the global movement's struggle against racially motivated violence and racism. We did not get a chance to share my personal quote or my mission statement, so I'm happy to have the opportunity to share it now. And you can read it as I explain this, because this work of DEI is not an easy one. And today we hear the media and corporate America use these buzzwords: diversity, equity. We are inclusive. And the words are indeed sweet in the mouth and sounds melodious to the ear. But the work is not always easy because it often makes people, as we say in Black culture, feel some kind of way. That is why this work has to come from a place of compassion, love, and kindness. And when it is coupled with right wisdom, the words spoken are unquestionably able to educate, enlighten, heal, and inform the listener of the words that they are about to receive. And so this evening, the DEI committee is asking you 2 questions. 1, what are you willing to do to make change? And 2, what needs to happen to make change? And so I'd like to begin with a history lesson, a Black history lesson. And I'd like to propose to you this evening that Black history is America's history. And during this walk, through these few slides, we're going to possibly discover what your history class did not teach you. First of all, I'd like to encourage everyone to look at the 1619 project, which was launched last August in commemoration of the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in England's Virginia colony. And this is a project of the New York Times. I like this project because it sort of makes it a little easy to have this discussion around slavery and how it is very much a part of America's history. However, I would also like to share with you that in South Carolina and Georgia, there are historical records of the first slave ships arriving as early as 1525. So I think you're here, and I do thank you for being here because you recognize the need for change. And in order to change, you must be willing to experience some discomfort. Change has never come without struggle. And for women here who have gone through childbirth, I think we all can agree and will agree that natural childbirth does not come without travail. So I need you this evening to expect to be shaken by the candid accounts of the Black lived experience here in America, which begins with as many as 12 million Africans being brought here as human cargo over a span of 400 years. I need you to sit with your thoughts and emotions as the photographs that were purposely selected stare back at you as a way to awaken your moral compass. We begin here with an actual model of a slave ship carrying what we call human cargo. And we refer to this journey as the Middle Passage. And it became more efficient over the centuries. While an average transatlantic journey in the early 16th century lasted several months, by the 19th century, the crossing often required fewer than 6 weeks. So these initial journeys was just simply human cargo being laid in the hull of a ship. And so what you're seeing is just the first layer. Imagine having 2, 3, 4, 5 humans stacked upon you for a journey of 3, 4, 5, or 6 months. And then somewhere along the line, the idea came because they were losing humans, because women were captured pregnant or with child, and they were birthing those babies during that voyage. There was no midwife, there was no one to clean. And so to lie in excrement, human excrement, and afterbirth for several months, the human cargo naturally lost. A lot of lives were lost, pardon me. And so the ideas along the way came to build ships with these sort of compartments, so that way that they could protect the investment of the human cargo with void of very little death as experienced prior to the older way, which by the way never really stopped. But if ships were able to have this type of design, then this was seen as a little more humane. What we see here are torture devices, and these were used for fugitive slaves. The middle photo, obviously to shut the mouth of someone who had been captured. The bells, of course, would make it very difficult to run without being discovered. And the other device makes it difficult for one to get close to maybe help the person. And it also makes it difficult for the individual to hide in narrow spaces because these devices would obviously be visible. This is actually, or these are photos from a very well-known photographer, Fabrice Montero, and who did a show in Benin, West Africa, a few years ago. And so that is where these devices are in a museum. And this is where this photography exhibit was shown. America's history starts with the American dream, and the American dream was that to live in opulence, to live grand, to be able to enjoy living, but that living was done at the backs of these souls who were brought from Africa to the Americas. And so the dream was to have this huge home with a very large veranda, as we say in the South, so that you could sit and just look out and enjoy the vastness of acres of land covered with cotton, covered with sugar cane or rice, and you could keep an eye out on all that you had gained. And so typically these houses were called the grand house or the big house. No one wants to talk about the fact that the slave market, one of the biggest slave markets in America, was on Wall Street, actually at the foot of Wall Street, and this is an illustration of that. And no one wants to talk about the fact that most of America's economic and political power was gained by the slave trade. The value of Black slaves alone represented tens of millions of dollars in capital finance to finance investments, loans, and businesses. In order to advertise upcoming sales of these human, of this human merchandise, this is a replica of one of the biggest or largest slave sales in the history of America. On this particular, or at this particular sale, it lasted for 2 days in Savannah, Georgia, which is where I was raised. And during these 2 days, 436 men, women, and children were auctioned off to various plantations. At the end of those 2 days, the final sale was $303,850. This was in 1856. Today, just a few hours before this meeting, the worth of that money today is $9,535,000, 535,000 for $545.17. Cotton was the second largest business in America at this time. And in this photo, which is 1905 in the port of Virginia, the first 13, if you look at, I counted just the first 13 bales of cotton. During that time, 1905 would have been worth $8,160. As of today, that would be worth $241,530.44. And then there's white gold, also known as sugar. And Louisiana was actually one of the most famous, known for its sugar plantations. In fact, the Louisiana slave owners were known as sugar masters from 1820 to 1860. And New Orleans became what we would call today as the Walmart of people selling. The enslaved population quadrupled over a 20-year period to 125,000 souls in mid 19th century. And then there was the tobacco trade. This was fueled by African and Native American slavery in Virginia. This was their cash crop. This was Virginia's most successful cash crop. And it would be used, those profits would be used to purchase indentured servants and slaves to cultivate the tobacco, to pay local taxes and tithes, and to buy manufactured goods from England. These are the covers of 3 books that were used to justify slavery. They were written by 2 ordained ministers, one being Reverend Stringfellow, and the other Reverend Ross. Stringfellow would write the first book in 1857, then Ross,
no, fine, sure.
In 1856, I'm sorry, and then Reverend Ross would follow with Slavery Ordained of God in 1857, and then Stringfellow would come back in 1860 with Slavery, Its Origin, Nature, and History. And so it was during 1957 that we can go back and find many examples, many articles using religion to justify slavery. This is Whipped Peter. Not sure how he became Peter because his name was Gordon, but he was an enslaved African American, meaning that he was born in America. So he wasn't one of the African slaves. He managed to escape from a Louisiana plantation in March of 1863, and he gained his freedom when he reached the Union camp near Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And so he became the subject of many photographs that documented the abuses of slavery. And so abolitionists used his photograph the most on postcards that were sent all across the nation and even internationally. Want to get personal right now and share, rather than a history story, my personal slave narrative. What you see here is the photo of Prince Bilali Muhammad and his granddaughter, my grandmother, Miss Katie Brown. And Prince, and when I say Prince, not Prince the name, but Prince, his royal title, was brought from Guinea, West Africa, to Sapelo Island in 1812. And he was given charge to run the entire plantation. This is not a typical slave story. My grandmother, Miss Katie Brown, and this is my paternal side of the family. Miss Katie Brown breastfed her slave master's daughter while taking care of her children that she birthed. She talked aloud to herself and had long conversations with herself. And my father marveled at the fact that although I was adopted, I too do the same thing. Miss Katie Brown was known to be sharp-tongued and quick-witted. She spoke her mind and would tell her slave master what she was and was not going to do. And she would tell him that she would do his work once she was done, D-U-N, once she was done with hers. And in the same breath, she would tell him what he should and should not do. And he would actually listen and come to her for motherly and spiritual advice. This surely is not the typical slave story that you see in Hollywood productions or read about in books. The story should have ended with Miss Katie Brown being whipped with at least 100 lashes, worse, her tongue being cut out, or being hung in public as a warning to the other slaves on the plantation to stay in their places. But nevertheless, her slave master must have had a different way of thinking or looking at slavery, because he allowed my grandfather and my grandmother and all of my paternal ancestors to continue to speak their African tongue of Fula. He allowed them to learn to read and write. They practiced their Muslim faith, and while also embracing Christianity. And he was compassionate enough to let them marry in the name of love. And most of all, he was humane enough not to rape the women and force them to be his bed servants for the purpose to bear him more slaves. And unlike most slaves, Miss Katie Brown received land and livestock upon her freedom to begin her new life. My family home on Sapelo Island sits on the land that she was given, and it's just a little ways up the road from the slave master's mansion that still stands, and we still refer to it as the big house. Want to share a little bit of trivia with you. Here you see an 1818 oil painting by John Trumbull. Here are the 47 founding fathers, the gentlemen who signed the Declaration of Independence. You will see 34 dots over the faces of the 47, which, by the way, includes Thomas Jefferson, John Hancock, and Benjamin Franklin. The 34 dots represent the gentlemen who were slave owners. Now, on the other hand, my maternal ancestors were brought from West Africa and the Bahamas to the plantations of South Carolina. And they have the typical slave narrative. They were not treated with any respect of their culture, and they did not receive their 40 acres and a mule after the Emancipation Proclamation. And undoubtedly, the slave master gave his seed to his female slaves, because my maternal grandmother had two sisters who could, as we say in Black culture, pass. And that meant that if you looked at them, they looked like they were white. They did not have any African features. So allow me now to introduce you to a man that is a part of a very big chapter of my maternal slave narrative. Most of you may know him and recognize him. This is Dr. Louis Agassiz. And this is the same Agassiz whose name is on the sacred peaks here in Flagstaff that the Navajo refer to as the Duk Okshlid. I know Agassiz as the father of the origins of scientific racism. He was a celebrated naturalist and a known racist. I won't take time to read this entire letter that he wrote to his mother in 1846. He would come from Sweden to Harvard University, and he took a weekend to visit Philadelphia, where for the first time in his life, he encountered Black people who happened to be the servers in the restaurant where he had decided to make or take his meal. But in this letter, he tells his mother that they are not of the same blood as us. What unhappiness for the white race. to have tied their existence so closely with that of Negroes in certain countries. God preserve us from such a contact. So he actually was an abolitionist. He was against slavery, but only because he did not think that white people should be anywhere near these people of African descent whom he considered to be otherly or almost animalistic. So in March of 1850, when the azaleas are blooming, these bright pinks and reds, Agassiz decides to visit Charleston, but actually he was there by an invitation to give the keynote address at a conference for scientists where his topic was on the separate creation. And after that conference, he asked if he could visit some of the plantations so that he could examine African-born slaves. And so Agassiz would visit several plantations, one of those plantations being where my ancestors were. And he made arrangements for some of these slaves to be taken into town to a photography studio so that those pictures could be forwarded to him at Harvard for study. So my aunt tells me my maternal narrative like this. She says, one day they were working in the fields and all of a sudden they were ordered to get into the back of a wagon. The driver did not tell them where they were going, and he sure did not tell them how long they would be gone. So they thought that maybe they had been sold to another plantation and were not given time to say goodbye to their loved ones. They arrived in town on the back of this wagon and were rushed into the studio. I hate to say or to see or to introduce you to them in this shameful way. This is Jack, a plantation driver, and a father and daughter, Renty and Delia, who were ordered into this studio, told to strip, and then ordered to turn front, then the side, and then from behind. It was in 1979 that a researcher talked to my family and would secretly share these photos from Harvard's library with us after he did research on the genealogy of some of these slaves that were at South Carolina plantations. The good ending to this story, the positive note, is that I would end up coming to NAU and working with some students. I shared the story, and they were able to get the Agassiz room here at NAU changed to the Thurgood Marshall room, and even further under the tenure of our former mayor, Coral Evans, who is with us this evening. The city council would get the Agassiz Street changed to Wilson Riles Street. And Mr. Riles was actually an NAU graduate of education, and he would go on to become an educator and California politician, the first African-American politician who began his teaching career here in Flagstaff. The history of policing, very quickly, you see the shield. Police in the South, and this is where policing began, were not policemen. They were known as plantation police or plantation slave patrollers. So this is a shield from 1858 from the good state of South Carolina. Here we have the patroller's oath from North Carolina in 1828, where the individual swears to, in his district, faithfully and as privately as he can discharge the trust reposed in him as the law directs. Here we begin to see how the brutality of policing began. And it would be 33 years later that the Vice President, Alexander Stephens of the Confederate States of America, would give a speech in Savannah in 1861 that on that day declared what many white people were already agreeing to, that indeed the Negro was subservient to the white man. And so this is the day that is looked upon as the day that white supremacy was declared. When we fast forward to the mid-1900s in Atlanta, this is the first Black police squad, the first, and they're called the Original Eight. But look at their uniforms and you probably would just say, well, they look nice. They look like police uniforms. These are actually YMCA uniforms. These police officers had to set up their precinct in the basement of the colored YMCA. And the uniforms that you see are indeed YMCA uniforms because white officers did not want to get dressed with the nigger officers. And so these officers were not allowed to drive squad cars. They could not patrol white neighborhoods and they could not arrest white people. You should be asking, well, what exactly did they do? The oath that they took was and I'm using because one of these men was a friend of our family, Mr. Jones. The oath that he took was, I, Johnny Paul Jones Sr., a Negro, do solemnly swear to perform the duties of a Negro policeman. He actually was the last of the Original Eight to pass away in 2013. I do have to share this. This is the police officer or the police chief at that time, Herbert Jenkins, who was given the charge by then Mayor James Key, I think, was the mayor of Atlanta at the time. And he charged Police Chief Jenkins with integrating the police force. Little did Mayor Keys know that that was going to be impossible for Chief Jenkins because he, along with an estimated quarter of Atlanta police officers, owned a second uniform, and that was the white robe and hood of the Ku Klux Klan. So it would be a long time, many more years before the police squad or police force was integrated. And just for some more trivia, this is a photo of Supreme Court Justice Hugo Black, who was exposed just after his confirmation that he had been a longtime member of the Ku Klux Klan, but it made no difference because he remained on the bench for 34 more years. I'm running the risk of going over. I just want to share that Black Lives Matter was created by these three beautiful women in response to Trayvon Martin, who's pictured here. Black Lives Matter grew immediately after the 2013 acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murder. And so this is a man who now goes around the nation signing Arizona tea and Skittles bags. So that is where Black Lives Matter comes from. And so a lot of people are questioning, why don't we say all lives matter instead of Black Lives Matter? Well, all lives would matter and do matter if Black lives matter. And so that is why we say that. And I think that is why you are here this evening. I look at this to be somewhat of a spiritual awakening, an opportunity to make a change, to make a conscious effort, to be aware of what is really going on and to be able to do something. And we're at the point now where we don't need allies, we need accomplices. I can sit here all night and talk about Black Lives Matter, but the truth is it really will not matter until you, who does not look like me, will put the shirt on, will wear the button, will raise your voice to say Black Lives Matter. And once we do that, it is only then when we can say all lives matter. And so for you ladies that are here this evening, we have our first woman president. All of our heads should be held high and our necks should be adorned with pearls, as we are now more closer than we have ever been in many ages to our original positions as the sacred keepers of the spaces we abide in. We have always been the first teachers. The future is indeed female, and it is indeed a beautiful future. Gorham, our inaugural poet laureate, said that we are to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man, and that we have been called to close the divide. And so we know that change and justice will not somehow work itself out. If we're going to advance equity in the spaces where we abide, all of us that are present this evening must determine to make this our focus. When women come together, incredible things happen. Gorman has called us to forge our purpose, or to forge our union with purpose. Ladies and gentlemen, take your position. It is time to get to work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lewis. Appreciate it. I'll share my screen again. And I wanted to go back to this image that Dr. Lewis shared from the Boondocks, but I wanted to contrast it with this image that, when I saw the image from the Boondocks, made me think of this image that I saw the first time when I was 7 years old. So this is, the photo on the left is March 29, 1968, Beale Street March in Memphis.
Misha, excuse me, this is Marianne. You might want to turn on your video so that we can see you. Right now, all we see is your background.
Okay.
Just go down to the bottom left, do start video. There you go, great.
So again, the photo on the left is from the March 29, 1968 Beale Street March in Memphis that led to Martin Luther King Jr.'s appearance in Memphis a week later when he was murdered. Interestingly, in 1968, protests stating "I am a man" garnered less controversy about messaging, although the message was sexist, than today's shorter message of Black Lives Matter. But Black Lives Matter remains misunderstood when truly it's essentially the same message as "I am a man." And what should be more disconcerting to us in 2021 is that this potent reminder is still needed over 50 years after the civil rights marches. So we're going to go back a few slides, and we wanted to have an interactive discussion this evening with folks, asking people to share with us their first memory of witnessing prejudice. So as I try to sort out here how to get everybody's face back on the screen so I can see you. we'd like for folks to raise their hand if they'd like to share what your first memory of prejudice is.
May she have Marilyn Bernhardt. Marilyn, you're going to have to unmute yourself.
I
Sure,
did
go
get
ahead,
it.
Marilyn.
There you go.
Yes. You know, I have a hard time with this question because when I first witnessed prejudice, I think I was probably in early grade school, but I did not know at that time that it was prejudice. I grew up in Oklahoma and it was the way things were. And I didn't understand that these things were prejudicial until I was much older. I remember though, when I was like maybe even preschool, I was read stories by Uncle Remus and Little Black Sambo and all these cute stories that diminished Black people. And I thought that was fine. You know, they were books and that's the way they were. We are steeped in it over our lifetimes and it's very difficult to look at.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think that's an excellent point, is that we've all grown up swimming in these waters, as Robin DiAngelo said so eloquently in her book, White Fragility. Anyone else want to share? Thank you, Marilyn. Margaret?
You saw me turn off my mute, maybe. So,
Did you want to share?
well, so this is kind of weird, but so my first memory of prejudice was, it was not in connection with race. It was actually at a summer camp where there was a hearing impaired child, a hearing impaired little girl, and we refused to go to the bathroom in the same bathroom that she went to the bathroom in after she went, because we were afraid. So I think that was a terrible prejudice. And then in college was the first time I ran into religious prejudice. And then the first time I saw racial prejudice was through my own uncle, actually my great uncle, who told a story at dinner one night that surgeons in the army had told him that Black soldiers' brains were different. He was convinced that was, and I don't know, our stomachs turned. We knew that was wrong, but so those are that was kind of my experiences, because honestly, as a young child, I think there were a lot of separate but equal, or separate but supposedly loving and affectionate treatment of Black people that I didn't recognize the way that was, you know, teaching me, and I didn't recognize it as prejudice. It's sort of like Marilyn was saying.
Thank you, Margaret. Anne, you had your hand up. Anne Holland?
Yes, there I am. I don't know where to begin, really. I grew up in the Jim Crow South in Alabama, so it's all sort of a blur. I remember separate water fountains. I remember separate waiting rooms for the buses, separate. The Blacks had to go upstairs in the movie theater while the white people sat downstairs. I remember when they closed the swimming pool because they had to integrate it. I remember when our Black babysitter came to our house and walked around our house to come in the back door. And I asked my mother why this was so stupid. I mean, it went way out of her way to walk around the house. That's the way it's done, dear. So I have lots of memories of racism growing up.
Thanks for sharing, Anne. Patty? Patty, you're still muted. There you go.
Okay, there. I also grew up in the Jim Crow South. I grew up in New Orleans. And where would I begin with the daily immersion in the prejudice, that it was just so ingrained and it was a part of our lives? I guess the first time I remember being faced with it was when I was going into the 10th grade. There was a brand new public high school, and the girls all the girls in Jefferson Parish were going to this new high school, but only girls. And the boys would be going to East Jefferson High School, only boys. And I don't know if I heard an adult say this, but the reason was it was decided by the school boards that it was not going to happen to have white girls date Black boys. Wasn't going to happen. And I was pissed off because I wanted to date. You know, I'm a musician and New Orleans was a great town to live in, but wow, 3 years of living in the effect of this structural racism. So, and that's just one example. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Patty.
Mhm.
Anyone else? Michael Steele. Michael, you're still muted.
Sorry about that.
No
I
problem.
always say I'm not going to be one of those, but I just was. So in 8th or 9th grade, well, it was actually 9th grade. I went to an integrated junior high school in outside of Los Angeles, and I was elected the director of social activities. And I remember being the DJ for a dance. And I announced, or I dedicated a record to John and Clotilde. I had no idea that I was out of line because the rest of the students backed into a corner saying, "Are you crazy? That's Clotilde's mom doesn't know she's going out with a Black boy." And I'm going, whoa, I was raised not to, I was raised in an extremely civil rights conscious home. And I'll never forget the feeling I had of being accosted by several kids at once. And I was just like overwhelmed with not knowing that I had done anything wrong.
Thank you for sharing, Michael. Someone else? I don't think I can see the entirety of the gallery. So did anyone else have their hand up? And feel free to unmute and just start speaking.
Yeah, I'll share.
Okay.
I can remember my grandmother. I grew up in a rural town in Ohio, and it was not very diverse. And then one day I was in high school, and my grandmother said, "I think that we should be really proud of ourselves here because we've always been really good to Black people. And around this country, there's a lot of racism, but here in Plain City, we've always treated Black people really well." And I just thought about it and I said, "Well, would you want to be Black here?" And she said, "Well, I'm not Black." And I said, "I know that." I said, "But if you think that we treat people so well, would you want to be in that position?" And she wouldn't answer the question. And it really didn't ever come up. It was just such a homogenous community. It was the first conversation about race, I think, that we ever really had. But it just made me realize that there was more of a problem than I'd ever thought about.
Thanks, Andrea. And thanks for your boldness in asking the question that you asked back, because that's a powerful question. And that very question opens up a lot of dialogue and can start some good conversations when we ask people to walk in the moccasins or the shoes of someone else of a different persuasion, ethnicity, race. Anyone else? Laura Hudson?
I grew up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the most segregated town in the North. And we desegregated in the early 70s in 4th grade. And I specifically remember my teacher who was, well, she was mean to everybody, but she was particularly mean to those that there's 2 African-American boys and 3 girls in our class that year. And she was just extra mean to them. It was so clear that she held them to a higher standard, and I knew it and I felt it. And then I also remember talking about this at the bus stop with some of my neighborhood kids who were all white, and I got called the N-word lover, and that was really punishing to me. Like, they were really mean to me about it, and I remember that really, it impacted me. I didn't completely stop saying things and speaking my truth, but it really chilled my speech, and it made me think twice about, am I going to speak up or not? It really made a difference to me, that peer pressure, and that stayed with me. So
Thank you for sharing. We'll take one more, and then we're going to talk about DEI and take a deep dive into DEI. Anyone else like to share? You can just unmute yourself. Lynn, go ahead.
I'd say that some of my experiences are the same as others. I grew up in Gary, Indiana, so that's a integrated place. Now, when I was growing up, it was becoming, so it was segregated, but then it changed very fast when I was a little girl. And so what I'd say is it was a complex time. On one hand, I'd say the experience was that Black people were over in another part of town, and you saw them because if you went downtown, and I saw them at the movies and all of that. So there was a separateness, and that's not right. But then the other part that was kind of interesting and layered on it is, at the same time the civil rights movement was starting, very active in Chicago. And so layered on it was a beginning of Black power and pride and all of that. So it was a really complicated time, but in some ways a good place to be growing up, because there was a lot of exposure to strong Black role models at that time. So that was the experience. And like some of the others said, I'd say the first personal experience was in the household. My parents were not, I would say generally not racist. They were immigrants, Southern European immigrants, so not even close to the experience of being an African American, but not as high on the totem pole as some people. So there was more understanding. But that said, I remember my uncle using a derogatory term, not the N-word, but a derogatory term, and thinking, not understanding that.
Thank you. I appreciate everybody sharing. These are deeply personal stories, and we wanted to have this icebreaker because we have, this is our special launch, and we have ideas about wanting this to continue. And we wanted to bond because these are difficult topics to talk about. And so I wanted to just share real briefly before we move into taking a deep dive into DEI and terminology and that sort of thing, that our strategy for this and our future DEI committee meetings is simple. to bring forth expert voices like Dr. Lewis, who can speak about the diverse groups that American society has marginalized, discuss their challenges in the present, and list or review some pending legislation that the League may wish to back or oppose to help support those groups. To keep it fresh, we will discuss different groups each time we meet. In April, we will hear from 2 strong Latinas making a difference in our state. And in June, we'll focus on our Northern Arizona Indigenous brothers and sisters and partner, as Andrea mentioned, with the voter education program to discuss issues around Black trans lives matter. And I just want to thank the folks here tonight who represent other DEI committees from our local leagues to the state level, both for your phone and your meeting time, helping us frame out our unique approach to the DEI committee for the League of Women Voters of Northern Arizona. So we'll go back here and take a look at some of this terminology and just get familiar with that. We won't cover all the slides I had originally intended. And what I've done in the PowerPoint is everywhere you see blue, that is a live link. And so we will make this PowerPoint available later to anybody who's interested. I've captured everybody's email from the registration, and you can get a copy of this PowerPoint and have the links. So these are from the League of Women Voters at the national level, these DEI terms. So diversity, equity, and inclusion are mutually reinforcing. Increased inclusion is associated with increased equity. And the majority of organizations with higher inclusion and equity also have greater demographic diversity. So this term diversity includes all of the similarities and differences among people. Further, diversity refers to population groups that have been historically underrepresented in socially, politically, or economically powerful institutions and organizations. So diversity means you're invited to the party. Inclusion means you're asked to dance. Equity means you are on the party planning committee. So what about equity? Equity is an approach based in fairness to ensuring everyone is given equal opportunity. Thus, resources may be divided and shared unequally to ensure everyone has a fair chance to succeed. Equity accounts for people having different access to resources because of systems of oppression and privilege. Equity seeks to balance these disparities. Inclusion is an ongoing process, not a static state of being. It's the dynamic state of operating in which diverse individuals are able to participate fully in the decision-making processes within an organization or group. So here's a nice tight graphic. Diversity asks who's in the room. Equity asks who is trying to get in the room but can't. And inclusion asks, have everyone's ideas been heard? So I wanted to share the national level diversity, equity, and inclusion process. League of Women Voters is an organization fully committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion in principle and in practice. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are central to the organization's current and future success in engaging all individuals, households, communities, and policymakers in creating a more perfect democracy. The policy continues, and it gets long, but I think it's excellent. There shall be no barriers to full participation in this organization on the basis of gender, gender identity, ethnicity, race, Native or Indigenous origin, age, generation, sexual orientation, culture, religion, belief system, marital status, parental status, socioeconomic status, language, accent, ability status, mental health, educational level or background, geography, nationality, work style, work experience, job role function, thinking style, personality type, physical appearance, political perspective, or affiliation, and or any other characteristic that can be identified as recognizing or illustrating diversity. I wanted to point out, and I'm so sorry that phone's ringing, it's a landline, I cannot mute it. I wanted to point out personality type. because we have all different kinds of personalities that want to join this work, but we do not want to discriminate against them because maybe they're a strong personality or maybe they're meek. Work style. So many of us in the league are retired and many of us are still working. And so those of us who are still working may want to really participate, but not be able to give quite as many hours. But we don't want to say you cannot participate because you're still working, or you can't give as many hours. And it's maybe somebody who's retired. Thinking style. Again, we all have a different way of thinking. And I once taught kinders and second graders in elementary school on the White Mountain Apache Indian Reservation. And we were taught a lot about kids who learn kinesthetically and kids who learn very well numerically and these different thinking styles, and to try to do lesson planning that embraced all those different approaches to how they think and learn. And then age. We know in general, the League of Women Voters here in Arizona tends to represent people who are of an older set, and yet we want to try to bring in people of all different ages who might have an interest in doing this work. So early on, after the League at the US level passed this policy, they did a webinar and they continued to do series of webinars about DEI to educate the League nationally about it. And so the fifth slide in the very first webinar they did, that webinar was called Governance and DEI Webinar, DEI Policy. And it clarified how the League thinks about this DEI policy. So what the League of Women Voters of the United States Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Policy means by stating a commitment to DEI being as much of a foundation of our work as our commitment to being nonpartisan. So for its entire history, the League has been nonpartisan and now considers that DEI is just as important. So I think you'll recognize at least one of these women. And my point in sharing these two women's photos is that, you know, Stacey Abrams has just been amazing in terms of her ability to get voters registered and turn out votes. Very many different kinds of diverse groups of folks. This gal on the bottom, some of you may recognize, spoke to us last year, Jennifer Lumpkin from Cleveland Votes. And my point in including these two incredible African-American women is that their approach is to get beyond their specific organization and reach out to partner with very different kinds of organizations that may represent different religions, different ethnicities, and whatnot. And that has been part and parcel of their excellent success in terms of turning out the vote, because they broaden how they can do outreach by bringing other people in that may do that outreach more effectively than their organization in particular. And it just gets that word out that is needed when it's time to get people to the polls. So quickly, what's the difference between these concepts of diversity, inclusion, and equity? This is an article that was published on the League's blog by Amy Sun, Equality is Not Enough, What the Classroom Has Taught Me About Justice. And here's the link for this article. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the differences here. And I found this graphic that I think illustrates this so well. So Amy Sun's article talks about how students have come to understand fairness as just basically equal treatment. But it's an oversimplified view that seeks to erase our differences while promoting privilege. So this illustration demonstrates that until all of us have the same privilege, none of us are privileged, because we're still all behind the fence. Privilege is when we make decisions that benefit enough people, but not all people. So the picture number one on the left. Privilege continues when we're content with actions.
Misha, excuse me, this is Marianne. I'm really sorry to interrupt, but I don't think we can see that slide that you're pointing to. The last slide I can see is what's the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion. Can you drag your bar down to show the remaining slides? Or are you still having computer trouble?
Yes, I'm seeing it on my screen.
Yeah, no, we're just seeing small slides. And so we're seeing slides 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Andrea, do you have this presentation? Can you project it in? Because there seems to be a technical problem with Misha's computer.
Just one moment.
Okay. There it is. All right. There it is. All right. Is that you, Andrea, now?
No, it's Misha. Misha's displaying it now.
Okay.
Okay.
Now we can see it,
Yes, now?
Misha. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what's going on with the laptop today. It fell out of love with me. I appreciate everyone's patience. Okay, so picture number one, as I said, on the left is where we see privilege when we make decisions that benefit certain people, but not all people. And then privilege continues when we're content with the actions of equality, providing the same 3 crates to stand on, like in the photo on the left. Everything appears fair, but because we can argue that everyone's getting equal treatment. But Sun's article makes some powerful points. Equality is treating everyone the same. Equity is giving everyone what they need to be successful, which is the second picture. Now we get the little guy up tall enough where he can see over the fence. But picture 3 shows that equality only works if everyone starts from the same place. And the little guy's starting from way down in the hole. And the tall guy on the left, he's starting with much more of an advantage. And so this third picture really demonstrates what privilege is about. And so while equity appears unfair, it can actively move everyone closer to success by beginning to try to level the playing field. And since everyone is starting from a different place, like we see in picture 3, we must also redefine our basic expectations for fairness and success as contingent upon our individual differences. We need to engage in equitable practices, fixing the systemic obstacles rather than fixing individual differences. It requires us to be more intentional, remove the blasted fence. So then we're liberated, as you see in the slide on the right. So we're coming into our last few minutes, and we were going to talk a little bit and do an interactive discussion at this point about what people thought needed to happen to make change and what we're willing to do to make change. But we're kind of out of time. So what we did, though, was we produced a document that's out on Google Docs where you can comment about the things that you think the League is doing really well, particularly our chapter, Northern Arizona, is doing with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have different topic headings for leadership and training, procedures and processes, recruitment and retention. And so here's the link to that Google Doc. And as I said, anyone who's interested in receiving the PowerPoint, we can email that to you, and then you'll be able to ask us this document. And we ask everybody who's interested to take some time and make some comments here, because that will help us to frame how we want to move DEI forward and the kinds of things that we feel like we need to address. The other thing, as I promised, we always want to talk about some legislation to watch. And so there's not going to be time to go through all of these, but I just tried to pull some things that are relevant to civil rights at the federal level, and also relevant to police reform and that sort of thing. So these are all, again, live links. And when you have the PowerPoint, you can check out these different pieces of legislation that are pending at this time. And then, of course, here's a very comprehensive list of pending legislation in the Arizona legislature. I wanted to share this photo here on the right. This is Lincoln Ragsdale Jr. in 1962 down at the Arizona Capitol. So as late as 1962 in Arizona, they were in the streets protesting the fact that public spaces in Arizona were segregated and people could not gather Black and white people together in segregated spaces as late as when I was 2 years old. Fortunately, that has changed. I wanted to share here too with you some other information. We have.
Misha, I'm really sorry, it's Mary Ann again. We're not seeing the slides as you're moving ahead. So can you highlight the slide that you want to show us? There you go. Okay. Yep.
Okay, where did we
Yep.
last leave off here?
I think perhaps I hate to make changes right now, but that's good enough. We can see that now.
So this was the last slide I did about
so we're seeing federal legislation right now to watch.
Okay. So the next slide should be Arizona legislation to watch.
We are not seeing that right now.
Are you seeing the final slide? Let's talk.
No, we're seeing federal legislation to watch.
Are you seeing Arizona legislation to watch?
Nope. Can you go over to your left and click on slide 16? There you go. Now we're seeing Arizona legislation to watch.
Okay.
And I don't think that from the current slide is working for you. I think you need to maybe click the little, but that's fine. That's visible enough for us right now, like that on slide 16.
Okay. So again, this is Lincoln Ragsdale, 1962, marching for the right to congregate and protesting the segregation of public spaces in Arizona. And on the left here is Arizona legislation to watch, both in support of police reform and restricting police reform, as well as in support of civil rights and restricting civil rights. Can you see this next slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Can you see it now?
We can see it, but it's not full screen. I think down at the very bottom of your screen, there's a little projector-like thing. So if you move over, you're on the, I think we can see it well enough, Misha. I'm hesitant with your,
Okay.
if you're having
All right.
computer trouble, we can see it well enough,
Nice
I think.
animations, that's not going to work. So because it's layered, it's a little more difficult to see. But we have this link at the bottom of the screen. And if you go to that link, that will take you to an evaluation form. And the evaluation form, which we have pictured here, is asking you, were you satisfied with the event? And you can rate that 1 through 5. And then we're asking, please provide any additional comments. What did you like or think could be improved? Certainly that technology. What resonated with you in terms of things that you learned that maybe you didn't know? And then are there future DEI topics you would like to see us cover? And so there's a short answer placed there. And the link, as I said, is the tiny URL link that's on the bottom of the page. And then I wanted to call your attention because we have some folks here that are not league members. If you're interested in joining the league, if you like what you're seeing about DEI here, then you can find out more about the League of Women Voters of Northern Arizona at this link, LWVNAZ.org. And there, if you want, you can make a donation that would help to continue these voter education and DEI kinds of efforts, and or you can join, and or you can see what our chapter, our local league is up to. So again, I really hope that you will take the time to go out to the evaluation form and give us some feedback, because that's how we will grow and improve this programming. And then, of course, on the right, you see the email address for Reverend Dr. Bernadine Lewis. My email address, if you would like to email me and request a copy of the PowerPoint, please do so. And then Dr. Andrea Christel is there on the bottom. And so if there's any other questions we weren't able to get to because of the time and because of the technology challenges, which I will apologize for again, please feel free to send us any questions via email. And I wanted to just say that I appreciate everybody coming out this evening. We've had an excellent group represented here tonight, and I wanted to thank Dr. Lewis and Dr. Christel for their time and their input into making this possible, and also everyone else who has been in support of this event this evening. And thank you for taking the time to come out. As we indicated before, April 1st, this same time, we will have another set of speakers, and then again on June 3rd. So we want to keep.
Misha, but before you leave, we did have one question here that I think would be very interesting.
Okay.
Is there a Black Lives Matter group in Flagstaff? And someone else asked, okay, for the emails to be put into the chat. But is there a Black Lives Matter group in Flagstaff? Does anyone know?
Dr. Lewis?
I'm going to ask if the Honorable Coral Evans would come in, and maybe together we can answer this question, please.
Well, hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. I did put it in the chat, but thank you so much for this program and for recognizing the importance of the subject and for willing to be so bold as to have this type of presentation that is just open and honest and very painful to listen to. It was very painful for me to listen to and to see the slides, even though this is my lived Black experience as well, right? I put in the chat that I wish that you would consider supporting the Murdoch Community Center and the Lived Black Experience project that they are currently doing. It was kicked off right after the tragic death of George Floyd and Deion Johnson here in the state of Arizona, who died on the same day, who was shot and killed on the 101 while sleeping in his car by law enforcement officers. Only his particular death was not on tape, was not videoed, so he did not get much coverage. At least 3 times a month, the Murdoch Community Center has very in-depth conversations about the lived Black experience, as well as provides opportunities for much of like we're doing tonight, back and forth exchange, and then how we can actually address this. It's not enough that we be supportive. It's not enough that we care. What we need is action, right? Deliberate, meaningful action to change the conditions. We are actually kicking off a second phase to the project March 3rd. All of this is done online. It's streamed much like we're listening today. Reverend Lewis is one of the presenters, as well as Miss Kara House. And we're kicking off a book club that will be very specific. It will offer a fictional and then a non-fictional book that will even go in farther depths as to what it is to be Black in America and what is that needs to happen. You can go to our YouTube channel, which is the Murdoch Community Center, Flagstaff, and there's over 44 different community conversations that cover everything from Dr. King, Malcolm X, what it's like to be tone police, what it's like to be the first of anything, what it's like to be driving while Black, what it means to be a Black police officer, slavery, the story of 440 people sold, and why is it that none of us know about this tragic case in history. So I would really encourage you to join us and be a part of this movement. We are calling it a movement. And it's called the Live Black Experience in Flagstaff.
Madam Mayor, may I come behind you to say, and the reason I wanted you to talk about the lived Black experience as opposed to the Black Lives Matter movement here in Flagstaff. To be quite honest, it has the name that's very recognizable, but it has not turned out to be the movement here that we would have expected. And so here we are with the Lived Black Experience Project, trying to really do what the national movement, the real purpose of Black Lives Matter, the work of what those three sisters who founded this movement would want it to be.
I could add to that, and I'll tell you why. It is we are, especially in Northern Arizona, especially in Flagstaff, we are very inclusive, right? And we want everyone to be together and to be part of something. Earlier, when we talked about the importance, or what does it mean to say Black Lives Matter, right? Well, automatically then we want to talk about the other lives that matter, because we don't want to be left out. So we want to add Indigenous lives matter, so Black and Indigenous lives. Women's lives matter, Black and women's lives matter. And it's kind of like those of us who have children, right? You know, there's a birthday party for the 9-year-old and their birthday is in May. And then the 6-year-old doesn't understand why the 9-year-old is getting all the presents and getting all the attention. It's not that you love one child more than the other. It's just that it's the birthday child's specific time and day to be honored. And so here in Flagstaff, there's definitely a lot of good works being done. But our particular group was focused on Black lives and telling the story of the Black lived experience. Because once we can all be clear that Black lives have value, that means everyone's life has value, right? You know, when you say Black Lives Matter, I guess maybe there should have been a comma and the word to, right? But you got to keep things short and sweet and to the point. But I guess I can't get any more direct about that. The lived Black experience is about telling the story of the lived Black experience and asking people to uphold and honor that. And it's not that we don't think other people's lives aren't valuable, they are. It's just that we are focused on one specific group of people at this particular time. Is that
Thanks
better?
so much, Carol. Girl, that was very powerful. And I think that really helps to clarify. And like you said, it's 3 words. It's hard to get all that depth of meaning and intent in there. Anyone else? Any other questions? Thank you so much for staying with us despite the challenges. And just appreciate you coming out. And please, if you have any interest in joining the DEI committee, reach out to Andrea and I. We did put the email addresses in the chat pod. I will make sure that everyone who's been registered will get a copy of the PowerPoint. And when we have the YouTube audio available, which may be not as charming or fun as I was hoping it would be, given my challenges with technology, but that'll be available and you can listen. So again, thank you for everybody coming out. And if there's anything else, again, you can email any of us and ask us your questions. Take care and be safe, everyone. Wash your hands, don't touch your face.
Wear a mask.
Wear your mask.
Stay
Good night,
safe.
everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to end the meeting now. All right. Thank you. It was wonderful.